Well, thank you, Dean Coleman and faculty, and first, parents. You probably asked yourself many times if this day would ever come. You have sacrificed, just like my single mother had done, to provide all of us with the education and opportunities that we were seeking. So congratulations to all of you. When I graduated from the University of Minnesota, my mother was more excited than I was. But she was the reason I was able to go to the university, because a month before final commitments to college needed to be made, my father called me and informed me he would be unable to pay for my college education. So my mother went to the American Legion and somehow convinced them to give me a scholarship so I could go to the university. That was the moment my education really began. And that was the moment that I decided to start questioning dead ends. Now, of course, my mother had plans for me, a nurse, a teacher. Those were the professions she wanted me to go into. I, of course, had other ideas. I wanted to be an FBI agent. Unfortunately, they told me I was too short. I then decided that I wanted to be a police chief, but would have to start as a police officer. It seems they also had a height problem with me. So I found myself teaching a class on organized crime at Portland State University, and then somehow found myself creating and leading the second largest PR firm, independent in the world. My journey has had many twists and turns, some great, some heartbreaking. Others were thrilling, but they were all necessary. Your journey into the real world begins today, now, and you too will find your life filled with plot twists, some questionable, some heartbreaking, some thrilling. But hopefully, all are necessary for you to become the person you are meant to be. In addition to the lifelong friends that I made at the university, I also found that questions have been my most steadfast friends. Other people have guiding questions they use as a litmus test for life. Tolstoy famously had a parable about the three most important questions in life. My old worldview changed profoundly after I read Erich Fromm's book, To Have or To Be. So for me, three questions and one answer have guided my journey from failed FBI agent to communications leader to the woman that I'm still growing into today. Question one, am I running from or running to? After I taught the organized crime class, I went back to graduate school and was really intrigued about the intersection between communications and human behavior, and how communications could actually create the social change that fighting crime could not. And then I heard about Tektronix, this major global communications corporation with a workforce of 26,000 people. And I had this idea that it wasn't just communications, but it was communications with technology that was going to be important to me. So for 9 months, I worked to get a job at Tektronix. Then I found the phone number of the CEO, and I assumed that his assistant would be leaving at 5 o'clock. I called him at 5:15, and he picked up the phone. I asked him for 5 minutes of his time so I could sell him on what I had to offer Tektronix. He cut me off and said, "Your 5 minutes is up." At this point, I could have been filled with embarrassment, with shame, and replayed the humiliation over and over in my head for 3 decades. However, I am my mother's daughter. We are women of grit. And above all, we question dead ends. I have learned to challenge myself. I've learned to challenge myself in the face of failure, and I have failed a lot. The first thing I do when I have a setback is I ask myself, am I running from or am I running to? I knew that I needed technology in my skill set. So instead of running from failure of that phone call, I ran back to Tektronix even harder, and I finally got a job there. That is where I met my future partner, Melissa Wagner-Zorkin. That is also where one of my bosses left and took a job at a small company with only 200 people, a small startup in Seattle called Microsoft. And that is where Steve Ballmer at Microsoft interviewed me. He didn't tell me my 5 minutes was up. Instead, he asked me what I wanted my title to be when I ran communications and public relations at Microsoft. If I had run from that dead-end phone call, most of my life would not have happened the way it did. Every great project, every great initiative, every great company involves the frightening risk of failure. Before every new and groundbreaking and scary endeavor that I have taken on, I always ask myself, what is the worst thing that could happen? I mean, what is the very worst thing that could happen if I do this project? And the answer is, I would die. Hallelujah! I'm not going to die. And it suddenly seems easier to take on that project. It puts things in perspective, and it has encouraged me to take the risks that I have. So ask yourself, when you hit a dead end that makes you want to crawl into a ball, is this really the end? What is the worst thing that could happen if you pick yourself up? Am I running from what I'm supposed to do because I'm afraid? Or am I running to what I need to do? Question 2, what am I trying to solve for? Whether in business or your personal life, always have in mind, what's the end outcome you're going for? Because if you don't know where you're going, unfortunately, you will never get there. So whether it's what job to take, what new project to take on, or the graduate school that you're deciding on, knowing what the problem is you want to solve and imagining the outcomes, then you can reverse engineer what you have to do to succeed. So be realistic about the obstacles ahead and get creative about addressing those challenges. In the early days of Microsoft, The single most important objective the company had was to establish Microsoft and Windows as the standard for computing. Remember, at the time, Microsoft was just a scrappy little startup that no one really expected to succeed. Bill Gates was just 26 years old, and the business media had no awareness of, or quite frankly, interest in Microsoft. The problem that I had to solve was, how does a smaller company be seen and make an impact? Undaunted, arranging a trip to New York, I called the technology editor of the New York Times. His reply, "I don't talk to public relations people. Drop the material off." I really had to dredge up my courage after that call, but I managed to wrangle meetings with the Wall Street Journal, Business Week, and Fortune. In the meantime, my major project was Comdex, a trade show in Las Vegas. We were expecting 200,000 people to show up, and from the moment they stepped off the plane till they left the convention, we were determined that they would only see Microsoft Windows. So, keychains in rental cars, Windows. Bar napkins, Windows. 10,000 in-room pillowcases, Windows. We were the little company that could. 6 months later, Bill Gates graced the cover of Time magazine, and a few days later, the technology editor for the New York Times called me. So if you know where you want to go and the problem that you want to solve for, then think creatively and courageously, and maybe a little bit outrageously, and you will increase your odds of success. So questions are your friends, and this one, what problem am I trying to solve, is a very close friend. Question 3, is it a place or is it my place? When I was in graduate school, I chose to write about the Edwardian suffragettes, who in 1904 were fighting for the right to vote. Their problem was purely communications. They had no access to the legitimate means of communications of their time. When your access is denied, then you have to get creative. And the suffragettes got creative and took over the communications vehicles they could. They leafleted London with a dirigible. They would get up early in the morning and chalk the sidewalks, meeting at Mary's at 7 o'clock. And that was my aha about communications. And that was also my aha about graduate school was good and even great. It was a great place for me to learn, but academia, unfortunately, was not my place. When I got to Tektronix, I loved working with the engineers, climbing up poles, asking them, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? I love learning how to make the value of their products real for their customers. And I learned, while Tektronix was a great place for me to learn about technology, it wasn't my place. Then came the time at Microsoft when I knew that I loved the people and I loved the magic of software. Microsoft was a really great place, but it wasn't my place. Finally, I had to go out and find people who were communicators, people who loved communicating to customers and constituencies, people who wanted to change the world one story at a time. And that meant it was time to find my place. Wagner Edstrom PR, now called We Communications. Joining my business partner, Melissa Wagner-Zorkin, who, by the way, is one of the smartest communications people in the whole world, was one of the smartest decisions I ever made. If you look at successful companies, almost all of them had two partners: Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Apple, HP, and many others. And they have succeeded because they have made their place your place. Here at We Communications, we've created a workplace that is committed to helping younger professionals, that throws its expertise behind brands that matter and communicates the mission of making a difference, that says every employee and every client, this is your place. This is our place. You are welcome here. Here's the truth. You will have to work incredibly hard at lots of places, some good, some bad, some ugly. Regardless of the place, work hard, learn as much as you can, and give as much as you're able. And when the moment comes that you feel deep in your soul to find your place, have the courage to seek it. And if it doesn't exist, create your own place and welcome others into it. Because the truth is, the world needs us to find our place so we can all do our very best work. So, my three questions: am I running from or running to? What problem am I trying to solve? And is this a place or is this my place? Are only useful if you listen. Listen carefully to the answers. This became painfully clear to me when a very dear friend and colleague who had retired from Microsoft came back into town for a board meeting. I asked him, like you often do, how are things? He said, oh, things are great, but I'd really like to talk to you. I said I would finish my meetings and come back and meet him. But I got caught up in those meetings, and by the time I returned, he was gone. 4 months later, my friend and colleague was dead of AIDS. I thought I had listened to him, but I hadn't listened closely enough. There are a few mistakes, sure, that I would be tempted to go back and change in my life, but this one, not listening to my friend, is the one regret and the one absolute change I would make if I could. So listen hard as you ask questions, and listen hard for the one answer that matters. One of my favorite places in the world is Powell's Books in Portland, Oregon. And that is where I hear the one answer that matters to me. It is the largest bookstore west of the Mississippi, and whenever I go in, I always look around and think, I'll never get it all done. There's so many interesting problems to solve. There's so many great, interesting people to meet, and so many subjects to learn. Someone told me once, Pam, you're always hanging off the balcony. You're always willing to risk. Yes, that's true, and those risks have had huge successes and huge failures. In fact, I've probably made more mistakes and failures than anyone in our company. But if you have a learning mindset, then there is no utter and complete failure. Because in the afterglow of success or the aftermath of failure, the one answer that matters is this: I learned something. So I hope you've learned a little something today. Those 3 questions that have guided me on my journey, with plot twists, some questionable, some heartbreaking, some thrilling, but all of them were necessary. What are your 3 questions? What is the one answer that really matters to you? And are you really, really listening for the answers? One last word of advice. The world can be very parsimonious in its praise. There are many times when you will work really hard, create an enormous impact, and no one will say thank you. When that has happened to me at the end of a project, when I'm tired, feeling underappreciated, I send myself a text that says, "Good job, Pam." So, good job, Dean and faculty, for graduating a fantastic class. Good job, parents, on sending our adults out into the world that needs them. And good job, class of 2016.